Welcome, everyone, to what is the 5th Africa Agri-Tech Development Forum, live and also online. We're gathered together today with a stellar panel, as usual, a group from business, from policy, from academia, civil society, hands-on practitioners, all committed to explore the critical question: how do we train the next generation of African agri-entrepreneurs for scale? And of course, we come together at a particularly challenging time for Africa and indeed globally, not least in the agri sector, which is facing rocketing prices in terms of agricultural inputs and a growing crisis in food security on the continent and beyond, with its origins in the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. So a particularly important conversation today as we prepare and see how best to equip the next generation of African agri-entrepreneurs who will be working in this challenging climate and helping us all, hopefully, build back better. Over to Nick State, who is the founder of the forum, to introduce the subject matter and indeed to set us off down what I know is going to be a very productive 1.5 hours together. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. And thanks for taking the time to join us this afternoon. So there are a few things for me to very, very quickly introduce. First of all, for anyone who's new to BOBAB, hopefully you've figured out what we do by now, but we are an event streaming and peer-to-peer networking platform dedicated to promoting African science, tech and innovation. Our goal is a relatively simple one: to accelerate scientific and technological innovation in Africa. We recognize, of course, that we can't do that by ourselves. So what we're doing is building the largest Pan-African community of science, tech, and business professionals in the world. And secondly, working with a really diverse range of clients and supporters to design and deliver events and campaigns that explore complex challenges, identify solutions, and promote cutting-edge innovation from Africa and around the world, acting as the catalyst in bringing our community together. One such campaign series is the Africa Agri-Tech Development Forum, which we created to bring together a diverse group of experts to explore where and how agri-tech is helping or can help ignite a much needed agricultural revolution across the continent. So the motivation for this came about because despite the rhetoric, the policies, the strategic frameworks, the path to scale for African agripreneurs is still a very, very difficult one. And it's scale that we are particularly interested in today. As any entrepreneur will tell you, including myself, achieving rapid scale is the holy grail for their business, but it's by no means easy. And for millions of micro and small agri businesses across Africa, things are particularly challenging. And this group plays a hugely important role, yet often an overlooked role in food systems up and down the continent. So it's not so much a missing middle, as it's often referred to, but more of a hidden middle. This group links farmers to burgeoning urban centres, opening up markets and creating millions of jobs in the so-called middle part of the food system. And they include food processors, wholesalers, retailers, providing a range of services from transport and logistics to the sale of inputs such as fertilizers and seeds. However, despite their crucial role in ensuring commodities and products flow through the value chain, the barriers agripreneurs face are many and varied, and access to capital, for example, is commonly cited as the major inhibitor to growth. Additionally, though, we believe that the difficulty business owners experience in accessing training is also seriously restricting their ability to scale. What's more, we're questioning whether the traditional approaches to business training or are appropriate for this dynamic and increasingly digitally enabled sector. So in short, we're asking, is a new growth mindset required to help this next generation of African agripreneurs imagine a future where they can thrive and not just survive? So that's why we're here today, to hear from a fantastic panel of speakers, including entrepreneurs and educators. And we'll be kicking things off with a panel discussion before we lead into a kind of more interactive session led by David Fairbairn-Day from our friends at Meek Ventures, when we'll be engaging with you directly and getting your opinions and your take on what it takes to create the right kind of course and the right kind of content to really help these people on the ground scale their operations. So thank you very much once again for coming, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nick. And please remember, everyone, we've got a chat function. Use that to put your questions, your thoughts, your opinions out there. This is a really interactive session, and we want to get the most out of it. We're kicking off with Jumani Tafla, who is a co-founder and executive director of Africa Eats. Now, Jumani Tafla is someone who many of you will know. He's passionate about transforming how entrepreneurs and their businesses are funded across the continent. He brings, 20 years of experience at World Bank, the IFC, the Africa Development Bank to the table, helping build much needed infrastructure that increases access to capital. So he's got some real practical hands-on experience, lots to share, and the work of Africa Eats, helping startup accelerators to equip entrepreneurs and angel accelerators to equip angel investors, as well as permanent capital vehicles to support investment into high growth post-startup companies, is just so important to the task in hand. So over to you, Jumani.
Great, thank you, Paul. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, whichever part of the world you may be. Thanks for joining us. So I just quickly wanted to walk through some of the experiences I have, and I probably will do this in the form of just some storytelling very quickly, just giving you a few examples. So as Paul shared, most of my examples will probably come from my recent venture with Africa Eats, where we have about a portfolio of about 30 different companies we work with across the continent, all within the agricultural space. They're all intermediaries, so we always work with a large number of smallholder farmers, hundreds of thousands, and also work with retailers on the other end. So when thinking about this, about the question of what do we need to scale up micro agripreneurs to become massive. I like that idea of micro to massive, which I saw in the flyer. So on that theme, one of the hard skills that we identified that was quite common across our portfolio, and again, even past that portfolio to my experience in this sector over the past few years, is this notion of financial storytelling. So financial acumen, we always hear that access to finance is a constraint. That one we all know. One thing we find is that when we talk to entrepreneurs, there's a difference between bookkeeping and between storytelling. So I'm using the term financial storytelling because it's one thing to say, okay, at least I know my books are accurate, which by the way is still a challenge to achieve, quite common. But even once you have accurate financials, the notion of how do I translate that information in a way that communicates a clear story, whether that's the entrepreneur to their own staff, the entrepreneur to the farmers they're talking to, the entrepreneur to every stakeholder they engage. One of the key areas we find is this tends to be a shortcoming across the group. And what we find is that those who are quite equipped in terms of financial storytelling, their businesses tend to grow faster because everybody can understand and relate to, okay, I understand the constraint you're experiencing, and how can I work with you based on that constraint? So that's the first example that I would give. And a classic example of this is there's a business I was engaging in Kenya called Chicken Basket. And they've done an amazing job growing to over $1 million in revenue in a very short period of time. And he admitted to us, he came and said, as we've grown so quickly, one of the challenges I have is there's so many pieces and parts of my business, the idea of storytelling becomes difficult. And so we spent time equipping him in that area. And so he had found the benefits from that. And I think he said that, scaling from tens of thousands to $1 million was quite hard and done in a short period of time. But scaling now from $1 million in revenue and up is now going to be even more challenging. And so he felt a lot more equipped after we spent time doing that. The other area I'd mention is financial management. So when I say financial management, I'll just use a simple example. When I talked to a group of entrepreneurs recently in the agri space, and I remember asking, okay, do you guys work with weekly reports? Like, do you know exactly what's happening in your business on a weekly basis? They all said, yes, we do. And then I asked them to share that report. And then when I at that point, then they then became hesitant, saying, well, I'm not comfortable sharing that information, because a lot of them, when I spoke to them afterwards, realized that the moment I share that information, you're going to start asking a whole bunch more questions. And so what their argument was, well, yes, we do financial reports and financial management, but we don't use that in our everyday business decisions on a continuous basis. It's more like, oh, how are we doing performance-wise? I'll check at the end of the month, the end of the quarter, see how some of the numbers are rounding up. But being able to make decisions on a weekly or daily basis based on the numbers, we found that was not something that was common among entrepreneurs. So it's the idea of taking the numbers. So one is to tell the story, the other one's to actually involve and actually use it. So I think those two are hard skills that we found. Operation-wise, I think the simple way I'll describe this is, entrepreneurs go through an evolution, as we know, from managing a small company as it grows. And what we find is that when you're smaller, the idea of just getting it done is the most critical when it comes to operations. But when it comes to now scaling a business, you have to move from getting it done to formalizing. And we find that, they aren't books that you necessarily read that say, this is exactly how you do it. And so most are the entrepreneurs we engage with, they have that challenge of, how do I make that transition, when and for which part of the business, marketing, for finance, for the core of their operations, et cetera. And then it scales from just formalizing operations to thinking of the entire value chain. So one of the challenges they have is, how do I see myself in the value chain? Am I just a reactor, or how do I become proactive? So as a business I engaged with recently in Rwanda that exports. And so what they say is, well, they collect all the produce from the farmers, they run over to the airport to then to get some space in the airplane so it can be shipped off to whichever country in Europe to be sold. And so they have challenges along the entire value chain. And we told them we have to look at your entire process backwards. So reverse engineer, start with the end person who's buying that good, and then negotiate every agreement and work your entire process from the back. And it was just a complete mind shift in terms of making that transition, which we find entrepreneurs tend to struggle with. Now, on those 2 points, I'll quickly mention accompanying soft skills that go with that. And I think one that's very interesting is this notion of mental models. And it applies to the example I just gave. It's this notion that we all have different ways that we think and we operate. And what entrepreneurs find is that the way they think and operate changes because the business completely changes. A $100,000 business is very different from $1 million business. And so that challenge of being aware of, what is my current mental model? What are the constraints of it? And how do I change it? I think that's an area that from a soft skill perspective, that has a huge need that we see. And we find that peer-to-peer is probably the best way for entrepreneurs to gain that knowledge. The last one I'll mention in terms of soft skills is just this notion of the difference between, I'll use the biggest stereotype, investors and entrepreneurs. So it's this notion that the way an entrepreneur thinks and the way they operate is different from the way that most investors would think and operate. And I think most times we see difficulty between investors and entrepreneurs. It's just communication in terms of being aware of how do I think and operate versus how others think and operate. A quick example of that is, again, I was helping an entrepreneur negotiate a transaction with an investor, and something as simple as asking, okay, I want to know the profitability of one of your cost centers. It was a simple question the investor asked. The entrepreneur came back and they had to answer the question 4 or 5 times because their concept of what the profit center was just completely different from what the investor was. And so the investor started to get frustrated, and we just intervened and said, you always need to be aware that it's not just a one-way thing of, I'm an investor, I expect information this way, or I'm an entrepreneur, I manage this way. It's being aware of who you're dealing with and how they deal with it. That's quite different. So I think those are just a few points I wanted to mention that were some soft skills, some hard skills that we saw. And what we found is now how do you actually address these skills? When it comes to traditional training, we think that just didn't work with most of the cohorts we work with. It's always helpful when you do coaching, when the advice is received from peers, it just makes a world of difference. And the last thing is on training. There's a very big difference between training and equipping. And I think our default when we work with entrepreneurs is to train them. And what we found is, rather than actually training, helping them hire a really good number 2. So equipping them in terms of having really good staff team on board, and then help with training those specific staff is probably more useful than forcing the entrepreneur to go through one type of training after another, saying, you need to be an expert in marketing, now become an expert in finance, and so on and so forth. So I just want to share those few points, and hopefully they were helpful, and look forward to engaging in discussion with everybody else. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Jumani. Some really practical suggestions there, both for hard and soft skills, getting that mindset in the right place, recognizing the importance and the distinction between training and equipping, and getting the best out of all that is available, and building the best. We now have a contribution from Eddie Omobe, from the new food product developer Nature Lock, an innovator at Nature Lock Foods, who do this incredible work of converting perishable, waste-marked fruits and vegetables into nutritious, delicious, affordable instant food products, tackling the scandal of waste and food losses. And of course, the most successful and indeed their flagship product is the instant ready-to-eat mung bean stew, familiar to those of us who know in Kenya, and known by the name of Ndengu. So welcome, Eddie. We're looking forward enormously to what you're going to be sharing. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul and Nick, for this opportunity. I hope you can hear me. So I'm just going to, let me share my screen now. Is that, all right. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm just going to, the context of this conversation, or what I'm going to share, is about how we as, would I say, the MO, the microorganization, have kind of, let's say, made it, and the things that we have learned along the way, and what we think would be viable for young agripreneurs who also want to start their own businesses in terms of the agripreneurship and everything that they want to do in terms of agriculture. And so what I thought of presenting, how I'm going to present this, is just to give a background of how we came into being and what we do and what we aim to achieve as we go along. And I really hope that I'll be able to get the time to be able to do that and keep it short. And yeah, I hope you'll at least get something. So the problem that we have here in Kenya is that there's a lot of the younger generation who seem to be moving away from agriculture and agricultural work. They see that this is mostly like a task for people who are elderly, the ones who usually have retired. And it's quite interesting because the median age of a farmer in Kenya is about 61 years. And that's just a year older than the recommended retirement age of civil servants in Kenya. So you can see some kind of a correlation that you retire, then you go into farming. And a lot of the younger people tend to feel, nah, that's not really my calling. That's not really where I would want to be. That's something for the older people. But however, there are those who still have the passion for farming, those who have the passion for agripreneurship. But when they come in, they find that there are the same difficulties that have existed in the markets way before. And one of them is, like, let's say, manipulative middlemen who buy their products at such low costs and then sell it at a very high margin for themselves. And that means nothing really goes down to the farmer themselves. There's also a lack of connection to market, leading to losses. I remember there was a time before I started working for Nature Lock, we wanted to partner with a pineapple farmer who was located in a very remote part of Western Kenya. And he said one of the big issues that he had was trying to get his pineapples to the market at just the right time. And when you looked at the roads, they were really bad. And you could really see that he was really looking for a place where he could sell his pineapples, really good pineapples, really delicious pineapples. But now he says he usually used to get a lot of losses, and because of this lack of the connection to the market. And another thing is just having really good quality products, but they are quote unquote substandard. for the export market. Like you can have a broken carrot that is still good, it's still fresh, has all its nutrients, it's as wholesome as can be, but it cannot be able to go for export. It cannot even go to a local supermarket on the shelf because it's not, as per the standard, it's not attractive enough, it's not appealing enough. And so the solution that we as NatureLock offer is an upper edge in a unique preservation method that we have that ensures that we take up whatever would have been wasted fruits and vegetables. And when we apply this, a method of preservation is that it preserves the inherent qualities which are really beneficial, the nutrient value, the aroma and taste compounds, the color compounds, and this is able to stay shelf stable for up to a year. And you can be able to access this again by just rehydrating with water. So imagine having the taste, the color, the aroma of a fresh mango long after it would have already been on the discard pile, it would have been compost, it would have been manure, it would have been a loss to the farmer. This is what we offer through our technology. And the good thing about it is that, versus the convention, is that all the produce is taken up. There is no grade A or B. We just have to meet some certain quality and safety parameters for our products. And whatever the farmers would not make to market, we take it up and preserve it. And also it costs much less to ship the produce out because with the preservation, you now dry it, reducing the volume by almost 70%. And so that makes it a very good way of preserving it for long distance transportation, especially if you look at where the farmers are located versus where we want our clients to be. That's not like in the urban centers. This is also really good for having a positive climate impact because there's not so much fuel that's used to transport, would I say, almost 3 times more the volume. So just as you can see here, this is a concept model of one of the things we would like to have at the farmer level. Just simple drying units, collection, and have it shipped out. I wouldn't go into the details of it. Probably in the next slide is just saying now into the future is this. We plan to set up such local hubs where all the produce is aggregated, dried, and then it's all shipped out. And this, first of all, is really going to cut out the middlemen and the brokers, since we plan, and we actually do with our current suppliers, engage with them directly, with the farmers directly, to make sure that they get a fair price, that they get the value for the hard work that they have given. And that, I think, just spreads out throughout the entire chain. And one of the goals that we have, and that now ties to today's theme of the next generation of African agripreneurs, is that we plan to have, as a way of also giving back, is to grow these cooperatives and hubs into independently run subsidiaries. And looking at it from this angle is, what were some of the challenges that we faced? What are some of the challenges that we met that stopped us or barred us from being able to really achieve as much growth as we would have if we had the support? And that's basically what I'm going to just share in the next few minutes on what we could be able to do. And one of the things we can do is training them on regulatory policies for operation as subsidiary entities. This could include tax compliance, compliance to local authorities. One of the big issues that we had is that the local city council, they have so many permits. You have to have a business permit, you have to have a fire license permit, you need to have a health and a food handler's permit if you're in the food processing. And it can seem a bit too overwhelming for if somebody is really starting out, and if somebody is interested, I would like to go into the agri processing. One of the things that can be done is to train on how these are done, how it can be sped up, how it can be made much easier. Also, as a food manufacturing company, we are really geared towards now food safety and basic traceability. And so one of the things that we can also hand over to the next generation is good manufacturing practices, so that they can know how to segregate bad product, how they can be able to deal with bad product, how can they be able to trace back a product from the farm that it came, and the farmer who grew it, and all that. Another thing is to also offer connections to financial assistance, like banks, credit societies, investors. As Jumane said, that what he does basically is that we'd like to also offer that to the farmers themselves as they run these hubs as independent subsidiaries, so they can be able to grow. And of course, the impact will just keep growing. More farmers will be able to bring their produce, more hubs will be able to grow. And the ripple effect just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And also fostering co-ownership of these hubs with the community, that it doesn't feel like it's a nature lock thing. It doesn't feel like it's the subsidiary thing, but it feels like it's a community thing. This then helps the farmers themselves. It helps them work towards making sure that this hub runs efficiently. It runs like it were their own business. That's something we would really like to instill into them. Having a sense of ownership towards a hub or the subsidiary itself. Just to continue is also something we realized.
If you could begin to draw your remarks to a close, Eddie.
Okay, yes, I will. I'm just about to finish. On this, the pilot plants, helping the subsidiary know what they would have when they do to scale up, when they need to do bigger volumes. Having that piloting plant is going to be very critical for them. We have experience on how to do that. Partnering with similar-minded people who have the similar ideals with us, that makes the hub grow faster. It makes even the individuals themselves grow much faster. And also passing on of the company culture and our own leadership skills. We believe that if you're able to pass on whatever you believe as yourself, as an entrepreneur, to a next generation of entrepreneurs, good skills, morals, ethics, these are things that are now going to continue with as agriculture continues going down. Of course, cutting out people like greedy middlemen and brokers who just want to cut corners and all that, as well as benchmarking, training, and many other connections that would be able to give these farmers opportunities to build their own capacity as well and their knowledge. So thank you so much for that opportunity. I hope that this has at least been of some assistance to each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Eddie. This is such exciting technology that Nature Lock is putting in the hands of these micro-organizations, these small farmers, agri-entrepreneurs, preserving taste, preserving food quality and a nutritious value, and at the same time doing so safely and in a way that locks in and adds value. So much to reflect on there. If we can now turn to Dora Momanyi, who is the founder of the Nutritious Agriculture Network, CEO and IPAR. She serves as a part-time lecturer also at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, from which she is a master's graduate. And so she brings this exciting combination of academic excellence and entrepreneurial zeal. So we're looking forward enormously to hearing from you, Dora, and getting this passion you have about the nexus between nutrition, agriculture, food systems, and climate change for people and the planet. So over to you, Dora.
Thank you so much, Paul. So I could like to do a very short presentation, giving a snapshot of what the future of food looks like. So I will share my experience, citing my experience as a part-time lecturer in electives in nutrition, food, and agriculture at Jomo Kenyatta University, and also as the founder of the IPOP Africa Initiative, which is a climate-smart agro-processing initiative located in Kenya. And I'm glad to speak after a Kenyan entrepreneur, so our experiences are probably so much the same. So I will quickly introduce us to two terms. One, the food system, which basically encompasses all stages that food goes through from farm to fork, consisting of various stakeholders such as producers, manufacturers, transporters, consumers, etc. I will also bring to our attention the industrial revolution, which is basically refers to innovative production process, which are partly or completely automated via a technology through the entire value chain. So one question I could like to pose to us is, despite the increasing industrial revolution and some successes that have been recorded and its application in various industries, and particularly in the food industry. In Africa, we still grapple with food and nutrition insecurity. We grapple with food waste and losses, lack of traceability, and food safety. Then I could like to cite, why are we here? Why does Africa still face such problems? So my first thought could go to, today we have a lot of access to information, which is very, very great, but there is a marketing scheme based on a lot of fear and misinformation, especially on modified foods. This has resulted to a narrow mindset on what modified foods are. And because modified foods are not appreciated, we find there's a lot of brain drain, especially from experts who study biotechnology. They tend to move out of Africa or specific countries in Africa to other countries which appreciate modified foods. And of course, smallholder farmers face post-harvest and economic losses. So what do young entrepreneurs do to fill this misinformation gap? It is necessary that young entrepreneurs could be trained on the use of digital communication skills. Also, as we all know, Kenya records one of the highest literacy levels, and through, of course, undergraduate and postgraduate studies. And as a result, in our libraries or in our university libraries, we have a lot of incubatable ideas which only remain in publications. But why can't universities and industries, learn the art or the skill of collaboration so that we are able to translate these ideas in shelves into products and services that are of beneficial to the community? I could also like to cite another challenge currently with the food industry, is that, like my colleague said again from Kenya, we fancy young people, we fancy the white collar jobs, which are, if you get a white collar job, that is the most predictable source of income you have. Then why should a young person then battle with a space of entrepreneurship, which is very unpredictable and uncertain? So these things have resulted to young people really drifting away from agriculture and so minimal involvement. And that is why, as my colleague said, the age bracket of farmers is after retirement. And of course, finally, we find that a lot of investments or accelerator and incubators and prize competition are not agriculture specific, or they're not food or nutrition specific. So then how will we eat food in the future? Or what do we expect food to look like in the future? So from my experience as a BioInnovate Africa Women Fellow in the bioeconomy space, I think it is time that all of us start embracing food biotechnologies, despite the increasing destigmatization, which is associated mainly with modified foods. Imagine one day walking to a supermarket, you buy your avocados, and you can keep them. Even after slicing them, you can keep them for a long time. But then what do young people need to do for them to fit into the biotechnology space? Then we need to learn a lot of data protection, numeracy, problem solving, and programming skills, because biotechnology comes with a lot of data. Also, I know we don't like to hear this, but in future, we really need to eat less meat and less dairy. It is evident that despite the climate injustices Africa faces, that we have even limited resources to adapt to the effects of climate change in future. So therefore, what do we need to do as young people? And we know young people are the ones who will be most affected by the effects of climate change. So first, we need to make sure that we are able to match, as entrepreneurs, we are able to match the European market, which is now very, very sensitive, or the requirements require of food products shipped outside to the European markets require that they are environmentally safe, or they are eco-friendly, they are processed eco-friendly, or they meet the green skill requirement. Therefore, we need to, as young people, we need to ensure that we leverage on the climate smart or the sustainable agriculture for us to produce foods that are climate sensitive. And As a nutritionist, of course, I'll talk about personalized nutrition. We know we have different genetic makeups, phenotypic makeup, and of course, different nutrition needs. And in future, every individual will need a different type of nutrition advice, a different type of nutrition product. And of course, this will require a lot of skills like genetic translation, translating the genetic makeup of an individual into what they require to eat. And of course, it comes with a lot of data and a lot of technology. And what IPOP Africa does basically is producing very creative foods and foods that are guilt-free. Today, if you look at our plates, you find that most of the food we eat, let's say in Kenya, you find our foods have moved miles and miles away for them to arrive in our plate. Of course, we are thinking of carbon emissions, we're thinking of food miles, but through creativity, we can create food that is guilt-free, and we can create it locally. And what do we need to do? Basically, like what IPOP Africa does, we leverage on food technologies such as popping and the extrusion technology. We are therefore able to produce a popped snack from various cereals, not only popcorn. Cereals such as sorghum or millets, those are our traditional indigenous cereals. And beyond the fact that we're using our traditional cereals, we are producing oil-free ready-to-eat snacks or breakfast cereal. And we are just taking advantage of a new popping technology. And finally, of course, due to the rapidly changing consumer demands, consumers will need new and better foods that are guilt-free, foods that are nutritious, foods that are healthy. But of course, consumers will not want to give up the fun that comes with eating food, or especially snacking. So as young entrepreneurs in the food space, we need to keep being more creative and thinking abstractly to produce food that meets our consumers' demands, changing demands. So since we have identified a large skill set gap, what then do we need to do? Like my colleague said again, we need to create training programs for the identified skill gaps. We also need to devise new methods to attract more talented people to the food industry and of course into agriculture. And because of the dynamics in the food technology industry and the changing consumer demands, we need to continuously monitor and adapt new developments and new technologies that come in food. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Dora. Bridging the skills gap, attracting young entrepreneurial talent into the sector. I'm excited by the prospect of avocados that don't turn brown, although I believe it when I see it. But guilt-free food, I think there you're going to have many of us taking you up on that one. An important presentation. We now turn to our partner, Burbab's partner in Meek Ventures, David Fairburn-Day, who will be familiar to many of you, an experienced, an expert international education practitioner in people development, a professional of outstanding provenance. He's an advisor and consultant to several international education companies, and of course, for 5 years, was CEO of the world's biggest single teacher development program for the government of Egypt. One of the exciting things about today's webinar is that by taking part in it, we're contributing to the development of this exciting venture, the platform, which David is in the process of developing, that will be a vital tool for all those entrepreneurs, those micro-organization founders who are making the important contribution they are to the African agri economy. So over to you, David. We're looking forward to hearing what you've got to share with us.
Thank you very much, Paul, and it's a real privilege to be speaking with everybody today, and thank you to Nick and to all of BOBAB as well. So thank you for your time. I will keep an eye on my watch and keep an eye on the clock, and hopefully the next intervention, Paul, won't be to tell me to be quiet, although you never know, you never know. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things to begin with. First of all, just like to highlight about who I am and what Meek is about, and what we're talking about here in terms of training and professional support for agripreneurs in Africa in particular, and then to throw out some questions to everybody. And it's been fantastic to see the questions coming in so far. And when we stop, I might actually bring back the chat so we can have a look at some of those questions which are directed at various speakers as well. And so I'm just going to pick out a few things that we need to look at. And then one of the things I really want to ask at the end of this is for your help. And I'd like to say thank you so much so far for the many people who responded to the questionnaire about training for agricultural entrepreneurs in Africa already. And we'll have a look at some of those results on those in a moment. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, as Paul said, I myself was a teacher for 10 years in schools, secondary and primary education in the UK. But I've worked with education technology companies around the world for over 20 years now, developing programs for adults and student and teacher development. And my specialism when I was teaching was as a PE and a sports teacher. So I come very much from a non-technical background with technology. And I always say to people that if you're worried about technology, don't, because if a PE teacher can do it, then anybody can. That's for certain. So my focus is looking at the pedagogy and the learning need, and then finding the technologies that fit that. So to give you a little bit of background to me, we are ourselves a startup. We've been going now for about 18 months, and really our aim is to create the next generation of entrepreneurs and actually bring them together. MEEK itself stands for My Entrepreneurial and Educational Kickstart, and the whole idea is to create a community where we will bring people together who are involved in startups, providing the training support that's needed, connecting people with mentors, connecting people with potential investors, creating societies and organizations of different people to help them collaborate across the globe. And really, the key point is that our aim is to change lives through entrepreneurship and equal opportunities, making access and opportunities equal for everybody, and really focusing on technology as a way of doing that. So very quickly, as I said, MEEK is a platform, an ecosystem where students, entrepreneurs, mentors, investors can create, as we call them, success stories that they can come together. And it's really a place to engage with people, with like-minded people. If we think about business networks, then LinkedIn is probably one of the most common ones in the world, but that is a very generalist platform. It's one that is very much across all different sectors. But what we're trying to do is with MEEK is bring together all those who are interested in, want to start, who want to have an interest in, who want to support, who want to mentor, who want to invest in startups. So that really it's a very focused platform community. And what we're trying to do also is provide the opportunities for learning and also what we call societies or groups, and also provide the right network opportunities. So within the platform, you can access it at different types, as a startup, as a student, as a potential investor, and find the people who are in there who have the same interest in either sector or stage you're at, or even geography. It's available on the different platforms, although right now it is actually going through some quite major development work. So we will put up on our social media streams when it be available, which will be about 4 or 5 days time, where we just go through some final development activity. So don't rush off and try and do it now. Obviously, you want to listen to me because you're very interested, but also more importantly, you won't be able to access it for 4 or 5 days, but while we just carry out some development work. Okay, so what we're trying to do is really look at the way in which we can bring together different organizations. As I said, we are a startup, so we are working with different organizations already. So for example, in the UK, we're working with a homeless charity, providing professional training platforms and access to those for people who are wanting to get back into the workplace. As mentioned on here, we're working with the Ugwumba Leadership Centre in Nigeria. We're also collaborating with the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce as well, and a variety of other different things. We are also business partner, and this is the important part where I come on in terms of training support for entrepreneurs, to the biggest accredited online training provider in the UK, New Skills Academy. So what that means is that we have access to over 800 online professional courses which are accredited by the CPD, which is the accreditation service for professional training and courses in the UK. And we have a variety of different ones on here. So, for example, we've created the bundles from all these courses. Say, if you're a startup in business, then there's 140 odd hours of courses relevant to being in a startup, and so on. You can see them all. We go through there. These are only ones that we've created to start things off, and we can create new ones for different things. And what we're looking to do is to create a bundle of courses which would be relevant and suitable and help agricultural entrepreneurs in Africa as well. And that's where your help will come in later. I have to do this bit. I'm not very commercial, but just have to say this, that all of the Academy bundles are available for BOBAB members. It's about 25% off rate of $80 for each of those bundles until the 1st of June. And from a important point of view as well, it's really important to know that the cost of this, we're trying to keep it down as low as possible, so that, if you've got 140 hours of courses available for $80, then that we think that represents very good value. We are very, very interested in a lot of philanthropic work, so we do run a program called Buy One Gift One. So you or a company can purchase a bundle of courses from our Meek Academy, and also then we will gift the same thing to somebody who is in need, who might benefit from that too. So to give an example, the Startup Academy, just to give you a quick idea of the type of things that are in there. So the courses available, and as I said, these are all online accredited courses that use the variety of different media, a lot of video course training in there as well. So for example, in this Startup Academy, there are courses on how to write a business plan, how to connect to customers, personal development courses, improving personal effectiveness, questioning and listening skills, making rational decisions, how to set up social media for business, communication skills for managers and so on. So and to give you an example, that's on there, the Starting an E-commerce Business Certificate. I won't expect you to read through that, and I wouldn't want to either, but I think we'll be making some of the content available for all the delegates, so you have a look at an example of it there. And this is what it would look like for me as a learner, either on my phone or my mobile device or a computer, as I would log in myself and see the courses that I'm doing. We also have the capacity in there as well, so you can set up monitoring. So you could have a manager of a company or a supervisor could see how their team are getting on and how they're getting on with the courses that are assigned to them. Okay, now if we look at some of the challenges for startups in terms of professional development and training, some of the big areas that we find, and some of these have already been touched on by my esteemed colleagues and their presentations, that lack of capital is the one that people always say, okay, I've got a startup, I've got an idea, it's a great idea, people say they really like it, but how do we fund it? How do we find the funds, and how do we get support for doing that? It's also a very, very predatory world. It's also, we live in an age where if you have a good idea, the worry is, of course, is somebody else going to take that idea from me? Are they going to try and take it over from me? And also, there's no central ecosystem for all this to happen. And that's why we've tried to develop Meek as the platform for all this to happen, to try and find capital, try and find people who can help and support you, but also in a very collaborative and supportive environment. And also effective and focused professional development. That is a real key to it. You don't have time as a business owner, particularly in the early stages of a startup, to spend A, a lot of money, and B, a lot of time on things. So it's about making sure that what you do invest in time and resources is effective and does what it needs to do. Unfortunately, and I hate to be negative, but globally, 9 out of 10 startups don't succeed. So it's really important that we recognize that you have to give yourself the best tools, the best resources to arm yourself to give yourself the best chance of success. And the ones that prevail the most are the ones that have planned most effectively and have the best connections. I think it's a really important point to remember that one as well. So how do we best support the needs of agripreneurs? And really, I'm going to throw the question out there. And we talked about, and some people already talked about the challenges of agricultural entrepreneurship, about the middlemen. I think Eddie mentioned that as well, about the middlemen taking their slice of it. It's a big challenge. You don't have much capital, but you don't need somebody else taking that away from you as well. And I think also we've had some comments as well around about there needs to be a big. Certainly, Jumani really said about there's a big difference between training and equipping. Giving people equipping with the right skills is a different thing altogether than training somebody on something, whatever it might be. And also peer learning is really important. So I just want to throw it open to people here, and I'll bring the chat up now as well if people want to ask to throw in some things here in terms of training and support and the need for development. What are some of the challenges that people have for in the agricultural entrepreneur world in Africa? So I've got some questions up here already. You can see them on the screen. But if anybody does have a particular question to throw out, then please do, or a point to raise. And I think one of the important things that I touch on, and I think is key to things is the accessibility. In terms of cost, you're running a small business, you don't have huge amounts of resources, but also in terms of how do I access training support. And the question I asked earlier on in the introduction was, is online training the best way of doing things? It has its format, it has its advantages and disadvantages, but in terms of time management, as we've probably all learnt since the onset of the pandemic, that remote activity and remote learning certainly does have its place. So I'm just going to pause for a moment.
David, I was going to say, maybe this is an opportunity to go back to one of our questions to one of the other panelists earlier, because Mary, I think it was Mary, yes, Mary asked Jumani if you have to prioritize one skill or one training focus for an entrepreneur, what would you recommend? So this might be a good opportunity to open up to the panel to get their perspectives as well.
Yep,
yeah, absolutely.
And Shantha also asked a similar question to Eddie. What type of training are you prioritizing for farmers you work with? So who's going to respond first to that question? Just get in there. Either that or I'll simply come to you. Okay, Eddie, to you. What type of training are you prioritizing for the farmers you work with?
I was hoping you would not pick me first, but it's fine. Okay, for the type of training that we are prioritizing for our farmers is looking at our what our business model is. It's a food processing farm. And one of the key things we have is food safety. And this has to now really involve going, not only just offering, would I say, write-ups and presentations of how to handle the produce that you get from the farm properly and how it should then be shipped to us. But once in a while, we also have to factor in how would we go to the farmers themselves and show them that this is how you need to handle the product. This is how you need to handle the raw material. I would say it's a mix of both in person and also just remotely. But for us, we really prefer to do it in person and with the farmer themselves so that they can be able to see and absorb, would I say, take up the information as it should be done. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Jumani, Mary is asking you a similar question. Just prioritize one skill, one training focus for entrepreneurs. If you had to do that, what would you recommend, Jumani?
Great, thanks. Great, thanks for that. Appreciate it, Mary. Thanks, Paul. Two quick points I'll make in this. One is, I'm hesitant to give anything specific because The challenge is we use a standardized approach, and it makes sense from how we're delivering the training. We say we want to have what's the priority, but from the entrepreneur's perspective, especially when you engage with multiple of them, each one's different. And so that's just a bridge that you have to cross in terms of, are you going to be standardized, knowing that some, you're sprinkling sand and some will hit and some won't, or do you take a more customized approach working with each one? So in terms of the topic, that's the first point. The topic, if I'm forced to, I would probably, as I shared in my presentation, stick to probably the operational aspect and the finance aspect. Those are two huge categories with which many things can fit in, but they are two categories that I think the majority of the issues that we see can fall into. Thanks.
Thank you. Dora, would you like to respond, one, to any of the questions that David has asked, but Sanusi asks, because your area of biotech food science is a critical one, but also quite challenging, asks, are more young people interested in this particular area? Are actually you finding the sort of academic intellectual hurdles such that there's still not enough people studying in this space? And how do you handle that? How do you make the science accessible to the people who need it most and can make the best use of it? Dora?
Yes, thank you, Paul. So I could like to highlight first that there are young people who are already coming into this space, despite the low numbers. I want to use an example from Uganda when the biosafety and biotech bill was trashed from Parliament. We saw young people champion for these bills. So I can say young people are super interested. And just this morning, we had a group of young people sitting down lobbying for a scaling up nutrition network, which is youth specific. So there's a lot of interest gearing towards young people coming on board despite the low numbers. So what we basically trying to do is train young people from primary school and high school, so that they can know once they come into university that food science is not basically going to cook for somebody. It is more than that. Yeah, I could also like to respond to Wal's question.
Yes,
asking if we engage farmers. Yes, we work with farmers, particularly from Kitui County in Kenya, which is an arid and semi-arid marginalized land, and it has significant potential in growing the drought-resistant crops that we use as our main raw materials. Yes, so we do.
Now, Nick is streaming this event live on the Bobab platform, and Jumani, Mikhail asks on that platform, how do you make coaching work across geographies in Africa? I mean, a number of you have stressed the importance of the cultural dimension. How do you ensure that isn't an obstacle in terms of making sure that coaching works across a continent that has numerous different and varied cultural influences? Or does it in fact have to be local and culture specific? Jumani.
Great, thanks for that question. I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be local, and it can be something that's done globally. So in our experience, whenever we try to top down tell entrepreneurs, this is what you should be doing, it never works. And so what works is when it bubbles up from the bottom up. And so what we find is actually creating a culture around coaching. So the idea of, instead of everybody telling, let's everybody, and I wouldn't say everybody, I mean every stakeholder entrepreneur engages, the investor, whether it's the suppliers they engage with, whether it's the entrepreneur and their own staff, to always ask questions as opposed to telling answers. And simply by taking that approach, so yes, I'm a professional coach, but you don't have to have everybody trained as a professional coach. It's just get in the habit of always asking questions actually produces greater responses than always telling people what you think the answer is. And so that's the culture which we try to build. It can be done by the mentors, it can be done by pretty much any of the stakeholders that we engage with and the and the entrepreneurs engage with.
It's the Socratic approach And also an approach in my part of West Africa, in Ghana, we have a character called Adonkoba, who's a sort of a bit like, I don't know, Brer Rabbit, if you like. And they say, Adonkoba digs to find out. Adonkoba digs to find out. So you ask the question, you engage in an interrogative process, and in the course of that, knowledge is built. Nick, are we getting any responses to David's question, or shall I turn to our individual panelists and ask them to respond specifically to the various challenges that David laid out?
Well, I think we've actually got one come in from Steve. It's indirect in the sense that he highlights correctly, I think, that much of the agricultural operations take place in more rural areas. And as such, these are more remote and tend to be lower income. And so ask the question, are they able to benefit from online entrepreneurship training? So I guess the big challenge there, which is kind of incorporated, is this question of access. Yeah. Oh, and there it is. the second point, sorry, that David's just released. So yeah, access, I think, is a really, really interesting point that Steve alludes to there.
Yeah, access, connectivity. Any responses to that from those of you who are actually working in this field? Eddie, how are you? I mean, the people you are working with, I mean, they almost by definition are some way out of the urban areas. Distance, sparsity is an issue, which is why there's such an issue around waste. How do you see them accessing online training? Is this an insurmountable obstacle, Eddie?
Personally, I don't think it's an insurmountable obstacle, as you say. When you look at how internet connectivity is in Kenya, we have one of the highest, internet connectivity numbers in terms of the statistics. A lot of people have access to a smartphone, or even just, let's say, the most basic smartphone, and our mobile network coverage is very vast. One of the mobile providers is actually able to provide up to 4G services in the rural areas. So we can be able to use this to our advantage to be able to offer the training, should it be online or remote, or even just having calls themselves with farmers who are in the rural areas. And the good thing is that as the generations are coming and growing along, a lot of the people are becoming more tech savvy. So it's easier to switch things towards the remote side, towards doing them online, as opposed to having them done in person. Also looking at it from the perspective of having to travel back and forth. I think that's something that's working in our advantage as Kenyans, is our network is really, really good.
Dora, I wonder if you can help us on this, because there's often a gender-specific issue when it comes to access. Certainly, in my experience in the banking and finance sector, there are big issues around access on the part of women to finance. Is this also a factor in relation to online access, virtual access, access to this form of education, as it certainly can be in terms of women and girls to access to other forms of education, both primary, secondary, and higher? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Paul. Gender is a big topic, and now what every other person, every entrepreneur, every academician is trying to do is mainstream gender into whatever they're doing. We, for instance, mainstream gender at IPOP Africa because we focus on women, farmers specifically. And of course, if you go, despite having an access to a large internet coverage, if you go back to the rural areas, really you will find a farmer who has a lot of, for instance, I will cite an example of sorghum, raw material we use. They have a lot of sorghum bags, but they don't know where to sell their sorghum, basically because they have no access to information. They have no access to markets, something which has been highlighted here. So indeed, gender gender, which is supposed to be a factor that is promoting or putting young women or women in the rural area above every other person, is becoming a challenge while trying to access most of, especially the online resources.
Thank you. We've got a question coming in about this issue of waste, and I wondered, David, if I could come to you on it. This issue of food preservation and how you minimize loss through through waste. How do you see this as being addressed on your learning platform? And are there any sort of courses that are specifically dealing with this issue of storage, refrigeration, and food preservation?
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Marianne, for the comment there. It's a really interesting one. First of all, just going back slightly, we talk about training and development for businesses, and how specific do we need to make it. I've done a lot of work before with vocational education, with apprenticeships and so on, and working with vocational colleges and employers. The skills that are needed generally for across every sector, whether it's agriculture, whether it's in catering, whether it's in engineering, for their students, between 75 and 80% of the skills and behaviours are common across all those areas. So if we're talking about for entrepreneurs, then the majority of the skills that are needed, that support is needed on, are common across whatever sector it might be. But having said that, it is important that we don't ignore the fact that there are very, very specific needs. Now, without looking at all 800 and something courses, I do know there is aspects in there. There is courses in there related to food safety and food handling. I'm not sure about specifically the food waste. I'd have to check that one. But having said that, what we're very keen to do with our partner provider who actually creates and writes and gets the courses accredited is, if there is a demand and a need for specific things, and food waste isn't one that I thought about until we heard that today, until we had that really interesting presentation, particularly from Eddie there about this, if there is a need or identified that for a particular type of course, then yes, we can have it built and we can put it in. So that's part of the learning process for me, is to learn what's needed, both in terms of content and also formats as well. And it's interesting to hear the comments about the accessibility and connectivity as well, which is a common issue. And some countries like Kenya and Rwanda, I know, have excellent connectivity and mobile communications, not the same in others. So that is something that has to be addressed.
Thank you. Eddie, if I can throw this one at you, and it comes from Steve Miles. As you get older, you can actually become, unless you're very careful, in my experience, you can become quite resistant to change. You can become set in your ways. So how have you found, how open are smallholder farmers, many of whom are older, in fact, how open are they to engage and adapt to new approaches?
Thank you for that question, Steve. How open are they? Well, I'm not really involved with the farmers as much, but when I do get the opportunity, I'm able to go and see what they do, what they grow, and what they're supplying to us. And I would say they are quite open to the new approaches that we offer. They're open to the new ways of thinking that we give to them. And I think this stems a lot from seeing how they have been mishandled, especially by brokers and middlemen. And therefore, they are open for a way out, let's say a path that's going to give them an opportunity to get the value back for what they invest into their farming, and something that they love a lot. So far, as I've been seeing with especially the older people that we are working with, they are very interested in they're very interested in the approach that we are giving to them, the direct approach, because it's different from how middlemen would do, how brokers would do it. And for them, they're quite positive that this is going to be something worth their time going forward. I hope that answers your question, Steve.
Yeah, that's an important point. The opportunity to cut out the middleman, the middle person who can be the bane of your life, that must in itself be an incentive to try new approaches. We've got a question to you, David Fairbairn-Day from EOB, who makes the point, even with smartphones, learning can't be done on mobiles only. We need teachers to speak to students. Yeah. Do MEEC see themselves as having a role in providing teachers?
We see ourselves in a role in terms of supporting, because the courses that we have are purely online courses that are available to be done on whatever device is available. So within the course themselves, the answer is no. But having said that, within the ecosystem that MEEC itself exists, the opportunity to connect to people who would be able to mentor and support is there. So those and myself as a former teacher, I know the absolute value there is in that the human touch, the face-to-face, the looking straight into somebody's eyes, for example. But what we're trying to look at is trying to create something which is pragmatic, in that providing accessibility for people. So if you have somebody who needs some support and some training on building a startup, are they able to travel great distances to do that, to go to a school or college or training centre? And the answer often is no, in terms of time and also practicality wise. So it's trying to be pragmatic and practical with that. So the courses are all online, but then the mentorship system within that means that, you know, if I myself was a mentor for somebody with my background and expertise, then I would be able to connect to those people within the platform itself.
But this issue of peer-to-peer learning, I mean, can you teach to teach? Can you provide training modules for community leaders, for community-wise women, for the linguists in the village? I mean, the other day I was in New Kofudua in Ghana, in the Ashanti region in Ghana, talking to a linguist about water and sanitation. And he has proved to be one of our greatest advocates for the work that we are doing in that area. How is that for an approach to deal with the point that is made by EOB, that there's something about person-to-person contact that is valuable?
Absolutely, and that I think is vital, and you know, the trainer training or setting up communities of people who will support each other is really important. And what we've got within MEEC is the ability to create societies of groups of people who you might be in a locality with a certain interest, that you can then organise meetings and events yourselves within that. I know the real importance is, and the power of it from the work I did with the Egyptian government, with the teachers there, that's by building communities of practice between schools and between teachers in the schools, that was one of the big success parts. So I don't underestimate that power of that. So setting people up so not only they learn the skills, but they're able to communicate those skills locally in that local context, and with all of the local knowledge they've got, is really, really important. And through, again, MEEC is a platform. It is not a face-to-face platform, but we can help to facilitate that through the different functionalities there are within that.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, and we could go on, but time, as always, is against us. Nick, over to you to draw these threads together and to bring us to a conclusion.
Well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let David do that, because in the build-up to this event, Paul, we sent out a questionnaire to all of our Agri-Tech community and asked them to feed back to us on various points that we've touched on today, and we got some really, really interesting results. So I'm actually going to let David wrap up to do that. But just one final word from me before is to say thanks so much for everyone for participating, and that this is not the end of the series. We'll be updating everyone on some upcoming events we've got later on in this in the year. But in the meantime, I'm going to let David share some of the findings from that questionnaire. David.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I won't go through all of them. And thank you again to everybody who has given us some responses. But just going back to the point there, Paul, you made that regular meetings, conferences, or get-togethers between agripreneurs, to exchange good practice. All the respondents said yes. I mean, that's a key point to that. And also mentoring from experienced business people, again, a really, really important thing that people see as very, very important. Just going back to the useful forms of courses, and if you look at the mix there between the blend of online and face-to-face, or mostly online, or that's there as well. And I think, again, going back to the pragmatism, we have to be practical, that we'd all love to sit and have face-to-face courses and learning and qualifications, but when you're running a small agricultural business, you need that support on hand, and our online world enables that to happen. So we must also recognize that is a really important aspect too. I'm just going to go to the last point here, just to wrap up. Thank you very much for that, and the feedback's really interesting. I must say, it's been, I've do quite a lot of online conferences, and the feedback and responses and involvement and discussion has been fantastic. If you have any other thoughts and ideas about how best we can support agricultural entrepreneurs, then my email address is on that, or you can contact Nick, obviously, through BOBAB as well. We're also the whole idea is we're going to put together a bundle of courses that would support agricultural entrepreneurs. And again, you might have 100 hours of courses, but 60 of them might apply to you, but 40 might not. But it doesn't mean you have to do them all, of course. But we are going to look for a small number of volunteers to help trial that, and to give us further ideas to look at the way in which it's delivered, the nature of the courses, all aspects about it. So if you are interested in becoming one of our guinea pigs, as we say, then please do also drop me an email as well. We're looking for a small number, just to make it manageable as a focus group, if you like. But I'd just like to say, thank you for Nick's setting this up, and thank you to Paul as well, and my fellow speakers, and everybody's been involved. It's been a really fascinating session that's it's really given me huge amounts of food for thought to take away. But thank you again.
Good. Thank you for that, David, and thanks to our panelists, Dora Momanyi, Eddie Omobo, and Jumani Tafo. This is just such an exciting area. It's about learning from the best that science, technology, innovation has to offer. It's about learning from each other. And at whatever stage one comes to this area of agri-entrepreneurship, whatever experience you bring to the table, whether you are young or old, you can always learn from what others have done. And it brings me to my favorite piece of Akan wisdom from my part of Africa, which is, just because you come late to the kitchen, you don't have to break so many pots. Yes, you may be late there, but others have been there before you. You can learn from them. You don't have to break the pots that they broke. So thank you all very much. Thank you. A big thank you again to Nick and to BOBAB, and see you on the next 6th Africa Agri-Tech Development Forum.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.